My Little Pony and Motherhood, a discussion. Is not intended for children under the age of 13 years old. I'm an adult woman, not a child, and if the comments are set off, it's because YouTube did it, not me. Hello and welcome back. It is me, Daisy Spines, here with a long overdue Daisy Spines Talks Too Much podcast episode. I apologize for this, as I had been super busy with getting ready for graduation, meeting requirements for graduation, walking graduation, talking with my friends, and doing all the stuff that's a part of it, but I still want to do this Mother's Day themed video to how My Little Pony has tackled motherhood throughout every generation and how it's good, the bad, the ugly, the absent. I'll elaborate, but we're gonna start at Gen 1 proper. Generation 1 of My Little Pony has an interesting approach because motherhood is pretty much immediately brought up topic amongst the people because a huge selling point is that you are the mommy to these ponies. You're mothering them. They all need mothering, the ponies. They all need guidance and direction to be the best little ponies they can be. But actual mother ponies who you would play with, so instead of you being the mother, you are controlling the mother and the baby, if that makes sense. That was a new thing. And as far as on-screen media goes, I don't think we actually ever see mothers and babies. We see really the equivalent of older sisters babysitting. There's also an absence of fathers, but we're going to talk about fathers next month for Father's Day, so don't worry. Around Father's Day-ish in June, we will see my take on My Little Pony's fatherhood. So Gen 1 proper is interesting in the toy line because apparently in the boxes of some of them, it would state, quote-unquote, that a pony could whisk on a mirror to have a small clone of themselves, and that would be their baby, and it's literally a baby clone of themselves. This is the only generation where this is noted as a possibility. Other than that, there is no mention of how baby ponies are made. I'm sure there's some made the old-fashioned way, but we only meet the Big Brother ponies in Gen 1 proper. Now, unlike some My Little Pony YouTubers, who I feel like you know who I'm talking about, I did not forget Gen 1.5. It may not be the best generation, and it might be one that I don't watch a lot of compared to the other generations, but it does have something interesting. It has mothers play actual mother roles, albeit mostly auxiliary, because it's one of those like teen-focused ones where they're like, oh, here's all the teens doing their own thing, and the parents exist, and you see mom and dad sometimes, and in this case, moms, I feel like we see them a little more often in My Little Pony Tales, Gen 1.5. But they do stuff, and the family units even make Punnett square sense, which is not something My Little Pony is particularly well known for doing, matching Punnett squares. So they can be assumed to have been made in more natural means, aka not a mirror or wishes, I guess. As far as the mother's actual role, it's pretty rare that they have a star featuring role. That being said, the more classical female roles are definitely far more present in Gen 1.5 than Gen 1, or even Gen 3 somehow. So now that we've talked about Gen 1.5, we are going to move on to Gen 2. For Gen 2, it is toys, but there's a few mommy and baby pony sets, and there's a little bit, from what I can tell, the marketing where you're still kind of the mommy, so they expect the young child playing to be like, I'm the mommy taking care of the baby. So it retains a lot of Gen 1's traits on the toy side, minus mentioning mirror clone babies. I want to say that there'd be more for this because there is no on-screen media to expand into for this, and I don't love that, but it is the truth. There's no on-screen media for Gen 2 proper, and we don't really get a full idea of how mothers would actually do it. Would it be more like Gen 1 proper, which has it where the mothers don't really parent their own kids, or is it more like Gen 1.5 where they do? And that's something we don't really know with Gen 2. Now moving on to Gen 3. So motherhood is also not explained, but there is baby ponies sometime, as we see in the Runaway Rainbow, meaning that there's probably maybe a mother. I'm gonna say probably maybe a mother in Gen 3 because it's confusing, Gen 3. We are gonna have to talk about 3 different facets of Gen 3. We're just talking Gen 3, the original pre-Core 7 era Gen 3. So this is gonna get a little confusing. There really is no indication of motherhood. There's the equivalent of sisters taking care of a younger one in Runaway Rainbow with Baby Rarity, and we don't have any elaboration as how this baby pony came into existence in Unicornia. That was never explained properly, and they never did bother to really make sense of it. There's not even male ponies, so I guess I'm going mirror theory. I'm gonna say it. They whisked for the baby, and then she became an older child pony, and they started training her for a role. But this is purely speculation. There might be some text that proves how the youngins come about, but it seems to me like they're just manifested from the universe somehow in Gen 3 proper. And Gen 3.5, they do have parent, and I don't get it still. So you have to just listen to me as I rant a little here. It's pretty much normal Gen 3, but they have parents and more distinct life cycles and siblings. So they have family units now. And they still don't mention fathers. Fathers were not relevant to any generation really before this, and they're still not relevant here. We do get references to them, but again, we never actually see the mothers in Gen 3.5, sorry, in Gen 3.5. But don't think that it's completely absent, because you could technically view the My Little Pony newborn cuties kind of come into play on that front, because those specific ponies, we see a mom doing mom stuff and moms interact. So, and they might even passively mention a dad, which doesn't make much sense again, because no males ever appear in Gen 3 of the pony species in a proper way. Only mistranslations and incorrect pronouns on female characters. We have mothers mothering their kids in a similar manner to Gen 1.5. I find this funny, but Pinky's mom is probably the most notable of the moms, and I think she kinda looks like Quibblepants' girlfriend. I can't explain why I think this. It's the haircut, maybe it's because he's pink, but Pinky's mom in that generation, it kinda looks like her. And now that we're done with getting through the Gen 3 weirdness, we move on to My Little Pony Gen 4. Which definitely takes a more balanced approach in general to the population, and mothers themselves for the first few seasons are pretty much not relevant, notably, mostly because these are the equivalent of young adult that are largely independent, and really only Pinky mentions mothers and grandmothers. Always Pinky, I know. As this is a podcast, this is time for me to go on a random side tangent. They should have mentioned parents a little bit more with the inclusion of Applejack's sister and the Cutie Crusaders in general, especially Scootaloo and Sweetie Belle earlier on, because we see the mother of Sweetie Belle, but she basically isn't there, and there's no proof that she isn't living full-time with their sister, and really, except for maybe seeing her once in season 4, but that is just my quick side rant. I am done. So, this balanced approach means that ponies follow more standard traditional family units that you'd see in both, like, the human world and really only the human world. In the human realm, you have two things going. Usually, it's a two-parent household with the kids, sometimes grandparents, or at least two adults, even if they are platonic or non-romantic. That means that they follow the standard family units where possible. And the main six's parents even get a good sewing throughout this. Some in lesser capacities like Rarities, and I'd say more major capacities like Twilight. But they're basically a normal mother. They get a little less auxiliary screen time. They actually get more relevance, and we even get main characters and supporting characters that are parents themselves and mothers. So that's a really unique trait to Gen 4 specifically. The mothering happens on screen with at least one character, and it's a consistent thing that's a part of her, and she doesn't completely disappear. So Cadence herself is standout mother in Gen 4 in the sense that she's one of the few that we see be a more raw version of a mom, and even then not that raw. And then, of course, earlier on we had the Cakes, Mrs. Cake, and I think C counts too, although half the time when we see her kids are being babysat by Pinkie Pie. I'm making the point here because Flurry Heart is largely watched by her mother, and we see the Cakes share that responsibility with Pinkie. I don't judge them anyway for this choice. They are working people. Pinkie is somebody who is trustworthy and good with kids. I completely understand why they do it, but as far as this goes, those are two supporting characters that are mothers. And I mentioned a main character, and that's because Pinkie becomes a mother, which I find very cool, personally speaking. I'm very happy Pinkie got to be a mom. Honestly, with her being from a bigger family, I'm not too surprised with how much she loved, well, bigger in the ponies, because ponies don't tend to have more than like 2 kids, I noticed. So for her having several siblings was kind of unusual. So we also got a main character. We don't really get much real parenting, though, as far as that goes on screen, but they do give a main character motherhood as a brief mention trait in the last episode, so that's nice. For Equestria girls, we're going to talk about them. Mothers are also questionable. We literally never see parents in Equestria girls. These are school-age children who should have and would have, in all likelihood, had parents intervene at some point. But they don't. They're high schoolers, and by the time we see them, they are pretty much capable of driving, so that largely makes sense. If you can work on your own and drive on your own, you don't really need to shoehorn parents in. But the reason this always bothered me is for at least a few of the characters, I do think it's weird we didn't encounter parents, specifically Pinkie Pie, because we were at her house once. And what exactly is the deal with Sunset? Is she completely by herself in the human world? They never really elaborate. And what's the situation with Twilight? Because the only one from her family we see is her, biological family would be Shining Armor, and then there's Cadence. So they don't really play a role. They're not really involved. They have to exist because they operate in a human manner of reproduction. So they kind of have to have two parents, or at least two genetic contributors and one person watching them. So that leads us to Gen 4.5. Parents are also pretty much irrelevant here. We don't really see them. They're mentioned in passing sometimes, really rarely in an episode. So they do exist. They have standard parental units where there's at least two adult guardians when they grow up, or at least two genetic contributors, if that makes sense. And there's really not much to be said about how they represent them because there's no real examples of parenting in that generation. For the record on Gen 4, before I move on, I don't consider Twilight a parent figure to Spike. I consider her a voluntarily parentified older sister figure to Spike. That pretty much wraps up the Gen 4 section, and then we move into Gen 5. For Gen 5, there are some notable attributes of this generation, and at least to me, the parents and female parental figures do play a larger role. Sunny's mother's absence, arguably, is more of a mention than the absence of other ones, like Rarity's mother being somewhat absent from her life. And then we have the case of, some of them where they have mystery mothers, like Misty, but their roles are largely the same as Gen 1.5 and Gen 4, and that kind of vibe where it's written. Usually there's two parents. They probably have two genetic contributors of the opposite sex that made them probably. It's magic. There's always a possibility that they don't need that because magic exists. It is certainly posing an interesting question, in my opinion. Queen Haven to me is a standout character because she has several moments where she's really allowed to be a character that takes up the limelight in a way that most mothers of main characters are not allowed in My Little Pony. So I do like that she's present, like a ever-present mom trying to deal with her young adult daughters and isn't really ready for them to leave. So honestly, my mom likes Queen Haven a lot. I was watching some Gen 5 with her, and Queen Haven's probably her favorite character because she relates to her to some extent, having two daughters close in age who are entering young adulthood. So she's a really great character as far as moms go in this, though. And that's really the full and technically speaking, Sprout's mother can be viewed in a similar vein on how they handle motherhood. Because Sprout's mother is present in the movie, specifically, she's irrelevant after the movie. Call that a plot hole, do what you will with that, but his mother's relevant, and Sunny's relevant. They do care more about having the mothers around, and then in the case of Hitch, the grandmother role is acknowledged, which, quite frankly, grandmothers are not normally a part of the conversation, except for, I'd wait to talk about Gen 1.5 because this does have some similarities. Gen 1.5 does acknowledge grandmothers as well, so I thought I'd talk about them. Generation 1.5, 4, and 5 all have consistent grandmother characters as a thing, which I very much like. Present grandmother characters, which I love, actually. I'm not a huge fan of Gen 5 in general, but I just like how they handled parents for the most part. I think they did a very good job with that. Parents and grandparents and family units feel pretty well built out and pretty good. If they fleshed out the characters, it could be even better. But some of them are just really fun to watch, and I really do think there's a few things that Gen 5 could have improved on, and among them would have maybe, as weird as this is about to sound, aging down the cast, considering they're pretty good at writing parents, to the point where they're still under the care of their parents, Gen 1.5 style, because some of them are truly the most interesting characters in general, and I'll touch on the fathers because they do a really good job with dads in Gen 5 too. This is where the road ends. We don't know what the next media will have in store for how mothers and mother figures are represented in My Little Pony, but it's probably going to be a mix of either largely irrelevant, but probably there because in a female-based show, cutting up mothers entirely rarely happens, with the exceptions of stuff like Gen 1 where they kind of don't acknowledge it in the actual on-screen media. But we'll see. Maybe Gen 6, Gen 6 has a possibility if they don't completely drop Camp Cutie Mark pitch pilot for Gen 6, because it feels right. This is one of the first ones where out the gate, where I had mentioned in Gen 5 that it had potential to do better if they had aged down the cast to be dependent. Gen 6 has them going to a Cutie Mark camp, and there's a lot of other stuff, but it is confirmed that that was an official leak of a cancelled project. If they don't drop Cutie Mark camp, what I'm getting to with Cutie Mark Camp is it appears to me that the characters have been aged down and we see parents and parental units, including mothers, which means that there's a small chance that they would play a larger role within the narrative in Gen 6, and they could play a larger role within the narrative. So mothers and fathers could get a sewing in the next generation, but I'm not making any bets as we are not at the stage where there's any concrete information about what Gen 6 is actually going to be, because it's really dependent on release timeline, and if we consider the potential movie, which has like no updates, people have asked, there's no updates as a part of that, but yeah, I had to mention Gen 6 because it felt right to this topic. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's a little ranty, but I just wanted to talk about stuff, hence why I have a podcast that's a little bit less organized and just like more broad, and I hope you like it. I know I talk too much and my voice is giving out a little bit, but thank you anyway. This has been Daisy Spines signing out. Bye!